The chamber was darkened except for the stark glow of a single overhead light that illuminated a long, polished table at the center of the room. A thick tension filled the space, a silence not born of reverence, but of anticipatory restraint, as if every heart present was collectively holding its breath for the inevitable reckoning. The seats around the table, arranged in a semicircle, were all occupied. Each figure, whether cloaked in anonymity or recognized by the public, had come to bear witness to this moment. Eyes flickered from side to side as cameras captured every nuance of the unfolding drama. No one in the room expected this to be just another formal hearing. Instead, it was the commencement of a reckoning that had been decades in the making. At the center of the table sat a woman whose legacy had been built on both admiration and controversy. Hillary Rodham Clinton, former First Lady, former Secretary of State, two-time presidential candidate, sat with an air of subdued defiance. For years, she had been the architect of her own narrative, carefully shaping every headline and every opinion. Tonight, however, she was no longer the author of the story, she was merely a character in it. Directly across from her, a figure with piercing eyes and a demeanor hardened by years of advocacy and a pursuit for truth sat poised with documents and digital evidence. Pam Bondi, known for her relentless questioning and unwavering resolve, had come prepared to dismantle a legacy built on secrets and selective truths. The first words to shatter the silence came from Bondi, whose tone was devoid of theatrics yet heavy with conviction. "Madam Secretary," she began, her voice steady and unyielding, "I'm not here to rehash your political legacy. I'm here to expose what that legacy tried to bury." Her statement, simple and forceful, drew a collective intake of breath from those assembled. On a screen behind Bondi, a series of documents began to flicker into view, each piece of evidence carefully chosen to support the damning narrative she intended to lay bare. Bondi's first salvo was directed at the infamous server, a subject that had haunted public discourse for years. The screen revealed rows upon rows of digital records, highlighted text pointing to a private, unsecured email server used during her tenure as Secretary of State. "You operated this server while holding the highest diplomatic office in our nation," Bondi said, her voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "And when the inevitable public outcry came, you deleted over 33,000 emails. Not by accident, but with a precision that suggests careful planning." The gravity of her words settled over the room. For many, it was a reminder that the deletion of thousands of emails was not the result of a simple clerical error, but rather the signature of calculated control, an effort to rewrite history in real time. Hillary's face remained inscrutable, her eyes betraying little emotion. Yet, beneath that calm exterior lay a tumult of thoughts and memories, each representing years of political maneuvering and public scrutiny. The weight of every deleted email, every smudged digital fingerprint, seemed to hang in the air as Bondi continued her relentless barrage. Documents recovered by investigators clearly show that not only did you fail to safeguard vital communications, but you also attempted to erase the trail of evidence with digital bleach and physical destruction. You did not lose control, you wielded it ruthlessly. As the evidence on the screen shifted to a series of confidential memos and correspondence, Bondi's tone grew even more resolute. This was not carelessness, it was a strategy, a calculated cover-up designed to deflect accountability from your office. The American people did not receive the truth. They received a cover-up of monumental proportions. Her words were punctuated by a series of clicks on her tablet, each one ushering in a new piece of the puzzle that would leave no doubt in the minds of those who cared to see the full picture. The narrative took a dark turn when Bondi turned her attention to the events in Benghazi, a subject that had long been the focal point of heated debates and bitter political battles. On September 11, 2012, she said slowly, 4 Americans lost their lives in Benghazi, an ambassador, 2 Navy SEALs, and an IT officer. These were not mere casualties of conflict, these were lives cut short by negligence and deception. The screen behind her lit up with the names and faces of the fallen. Each image was a stark reminder of the human cost of political miscalculations and, in Bondi's argument, of a willful disregard for human life. She recalled the numerous warnings that had been issued, the over 600 security requests from Libyan officials, all of which had been met with denial. Your department was alerted repeatedly, yet no effective measures were taken, Bondi asserted. Instead, you chose a narrative, a convenient lie, telling grieving families that a spontaneous YouTube video had sparked a riot. Meanwhile, in private correspondence, you acknowledged a more sinister reality. You knew exactly what was happening, yet you opted for deception. The juxtaposition of public misrepresentation and private acknowledgement was presented as undeniable evidence of premeditated misconduct. How do you explain this incongruity? She challenged, her gaze fixed squarely on Hillary, demanding an answer that would never come. The narrative then shifted its focus to another realm of controversy, the Clinton Foundation. Bondi's eyes swept across the room as she introduced what she described as the true nature of the organization. You have long boasted of the Clinton Foundation as a beacon of transparency and philanthropy, she began, her voice rising with fervor. Yet, the facts paint a different picture. The foundation was not a charitable organization. It was a conduit for political favors, a cash flow system designed to peddle influence. While the public saw charitable projects, behind the scenes, hundreds of millions of dollars were being funneled from foreign governments, corporations, and lobbying firms directly to your inner circle. The screen changed once again, this time displaying donation records that listed staggering sums from countries such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, along with contributions from dubious corporate sources. While you approved arms deals and energy contracts that benefited these very donors, your foundation accepted money that directly correlated to the business done by your department, Bondi continued. This is not coincidence, it is a pay-to-play scheme that corrupts the very essence of public service. Hillary's face tightened imperceptibly as the evidence mounted. Yet, in the midst of Bondi's relentless exposition, a subtle twist emerged. As the accusations piled up, a murmur ran through the room, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, narratives are rarely one-dimensional. A couple of voices in the audience exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Was it possible that behind all the controversy lay layers of political intrigue that transcended the simplistic narratives Bondi was painting? The seed of doubt had been planted, even as the audience remained transfixed by the stark presentation of alleged misdeeds. But Bondi was not finished. With the precision of a seasoned rhetorician, she launched into the next chapter of her indictment, one that involved the document that had come to be known as the Steele dossier. You funded the creation of the Steele dossier, she stated, her tone laced with barely concealed indignation. A dossier filled with salacious, unverifiable claims intended to discredit your political opponent. This dossier was not the product of rigorous investigation, it was political opposition research dressed up as intelligence. It was a grenade thrown into the heart of American democracy, intended to delegitimize a rival before the ballots were even cast. The screen now displayed financial trails and internal emails linking the dossier to the Clinton campaign. Your campaign not only sponsored this operation, but you allowed it to be weaponized against a candidate, and in doing so, you contributed to the erosion of trust in our democratic institutions. A palpable silence fell over the chamber as Bondi's words sank in. Every accusation was a carefully laid brick in the edifice of a narrative that sought to reframe decades of political maneuvering as a systematic abuse of power. Hillary, seated across the table, remained silent, her expression inscrutable. For years she had been seen as the consummate political strategist, a woman who understood the power of narrative and the importance of controlling the flow of information. Yet tonight, that same strategic mind was being accused of having used her acumen not for the public good but for personal and political enrichment. In a sudden twist, Bondi shifted the narrative yet again, unveiling a final, devastating chapter that interwove personal ambition with national tragedy. Your actions in Benghazi, your manipulation of the narrative, your financial entanglements, they are all symptoms of a larger malaise, she declared, her voice resonating with the gravity of someone who had borne witness to the cumulative impact of these decisions. They reveal a pattern of behavior where the protection of a personal legacy was prioritized over the lives and trust of the American people. The tension in the room became almost tangible as the air grew heavier with the weight of the implications. This is not simply about emails, not solely about a charity gone awry, but about the very fabric of our democratic institutions being undermined by a single, calculating individual. For a moment, time seemed to slow down in that room. The gravity of the situation was mirrored in the eyes of every observer, each one grappling with the enormity of the claims being laid before them. Outside the chamber, the nation had grown weary of partisan bickering and political spin, yearning instead for truth and accountability. Tonight, the narrative that had been carefully curated over decades was being dismantled piece by piece, revealing a tapestry of decisions that had, according to Bondi, cost the nation dearly. In a twist that no one had foreseen, as Bondi continued her relentless pursuit of accountability, a subtle change came over the room. A murmur of discontent arose from the corners, as a few individuals in the audience began to whisper among themselves. Some questioned whether the evidence presented was being interpreted through a lens of political bias. Others wondered if the narrative, as compelling as it was, might have been manipulated by forces as cunning and as ruthless as those it sought to expose. The seeds of uncertainty, though small, hinted at the complexity of truth in an era where every fact could be twisted into a weapon. Bondi, sensing the shift in energy, pressed on with renewed determination. "Do you understand," she demanded, "that every document, every email, every financial record presented here is not just a record of past actions, but a testament to a system that allowed you to be above the law?" Her voice was unyielding as she recounted details of backroom deals and whispered conversations that had, over time, contributed to the erosion of accountability. "Your ability to bend the rules was not an accident, it was an art form. And now, that art form has been exposed for all to see." Hillary's eyes darted briefly toward the side, as if searching for some hidden ally or a remnant of hope in a room that had grown increasingly hostile. Yet, she remained seated, a silent testament to the long history of political maneuvering that had defined her career. The accumulation of evidence was overwhelming, and even the most loyal observers found it difficult to dismiss the methodical presentation of facts and figures. Yet, as Bondi recounted the details of a covert arms deal, a transaction linking American uranium reserves to a Russian-controlled entity, an undercurrent of incredulity began to ripple through the audience. How could such a blatant conflict of interest be allowed to occur? Bondi's voice trembled with a mixture of fury and sorrow. "While you were busy rewriting the rules to protect your legacy, American security was being compromised. Lives were endangered, and trust was shattered." The room, once filled with a single, oppressive silence, now buzzed with the energy of confrontation and reflection. A seasoned political analyst in the back of the room dared to lean forward, her eyes narrowing as she took in the gravity of Bondi's words. The narrative was no longer a simple litany of accusations, it had transformed into a meditation on the nature of power, responsibility, and the sacrifices demanded by leadership. In that charged atmosphere, every fact presented was more than a record, it was a moral indictment. For what felt like an eternity, the only sound was the soft hum of the projector as it cycled through images of solemn faces, stark documents, and blurred signatures. Then, as if on cue, Bondi paused. The silence that followed was not one of emptiness, but of expectation. All eyes in the chamber were fixed on her, waiting for the final stroke of a master painter revealing the full portrait of corruption and betrayal. "Madam Secretary," she said once more, her voice now softer but no less resolute, "this is the culmination of decades of secrets, lies, and deliberate obfuscation. The documents you have spent your career manipulating are now laid bare, and the truth is no longer hidden behind the veneer of political expediency." A cold gust of wind swept through the room as if nature itself had come to testify. The audience, a mix of hardened political operatives, activists, and once loyal supporters, collectively shifted in their seats. The moment was historic, a turning point where the veil of protection that had long shielded a powerful figure was finally being lifted. Yet, in that same moment, a twist emerged that none had anticipated. From the far end of the chamber, a young woman in a modest suit rose slowly. Her eyes, bright with determination and raw emotion, met Bondi's unwavering gaze. If you have all these documents, she said with a voice that resonated with the clarity of a long-awaited confession, then why not show us the full picture? Why not reveal the names, the dates, the transactions that tie every one of these alleged misdeeds to the very heart of the system you claim is broken? The question hung in the air like a challenge. One that was both daring and defiant. Bondi's composure wavered for just a fraction of a second, the only hint that even she felt the weight of this new demand. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the distant echo of footsteps on the marble floor. Finally, Bondi nodded slowly, acknowledging the legitimacy of the challenge. "Very well," she said, her voice resolute once more, "let us begin." In that moment, the room was transformed from a stage of accusation into an arena of revelation. Every screen, every document, every whispered conversation was now part of a larger, unfolding narrative, a narrative that promised to expose not only the misdeeds of one individual, but the very structure of a system built on the illusion of accountability. The young woman's challenge sparked a flurry of activity among the aides and technical staff. Pages were rapidly turned, files were retrieved, and the evidence that had been meticulously curated for years began to spill out in a torrent of raw information. As the digital evidence cascaded across the screens, the narrative took on an almost cinematic quality. Every image, every file was a puzzle piece in a larger, multifaceted story that was as complex as it was damning. Bonds of loyalty were tested in that chamber as long-standing alliances and hidden agendas were suddenly brought to light. And yet, amid the chaos of revelations, one truth remained immutable, that for years, a powerful machine had operated with impunity, bending the rules of politics and governance to suit its own ends. The revelations did not come without their own twists and turns. As the digital trail unfolded, a series of previously unknown transactions emerged, deals that linked foreign funds to private contracts in a manner so intricate that even the most seasoned investigators found themselves scrambling to connect the dots. In one particularly shocking sequence, a series of emails revealed that a covert meeting had taken place on a rainy evening in an unremarkable office building. The meeting, which had been recorded but never publicly disclosed, detailed the transfer of funds from a Middle Eastern donor to a private contractor, with the implicit understanding that in return, certain regulatory decisions would be influenced in favor of those donors. The evidence was damning, not merely for its content, but for what it implied about the very nature of the relationship between public office and private gain. As the evidence continued to mount, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted once again. A palpable sense of urgency replaced the earlier, measured cadence of Bondi's presentation. "This," she said, gesturing to the sprawling network of documents on the screens, "is the blueprint of a system that has been allowed to thrive by those who believe themselves above accountability. It is a system that turns every tragedy into an opportunity, every misfortune into a stepping stone for personal advancement." Her words were not merely an indictment of a single career, but a sweeping condemnation of an entire political order that had long operated in the shadows. For a moment, the chamber was silent, each person lost in thought as the full magnitude of the revelation sank in. Then, as if compelled by the weight of history, a low murmur began to ripple through the audience. It was the sound of a people awakening to a truth that had been obscured by decades of obfuscation and half-truths. In that murmur, there was hope, a hope that the long-standing cycle of unaccountability might finally be broken, that the machinery of power could be forced to confront the consequences of its actions. Hillary Clinton sat at the center of it all, her expression now a study in quiet resignation. The images of manipulated emails, covert deals, and ignored warnings had laid bare a narrative that she had long tried to keep hidden. In the face of this overwhelming evidence, even the most carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. There was no longer any room for vague denials or half-hearted apologies. The time for absolution had passed, what remained was the cold, unyielding truth of the evidence, a truth that demanded accountability, no matter how high the price might be. As the final documents were displayed and every piece of the puzzle had been set before the assembled witnesses, Bondi's voice softened. "Madam Secretary," she said with a finality that resonated throughout the chamber, this is the culmination of decades of secrets, of attempts to rewrite history through careful manipulation and deception. The American people deserve better than this. They deserve the truth, and today, that truth has been laid bare. Her words were both a declaration and a warning, a call for justice and a repudiation of a system that had long placed loyalty to party over the well-being of the nation. In that moment, the chamber itself seemed to exhale, the oppressive tension lifting ever so slightly as if the very walls had borne witness to a turning point in history. For some, it was a moment of vindication, a long overdue reckoning with the forces that had manipulated the lives of millions. For others, it was the end of an era, a final chapter in a story of unchecked ambition and relentless pursuit of power. And as the cameras continued to roll, capturing every nuanced expression, every subtle shift in posture, it was clear that history was in the making. The narrative that had been meticulously constructed over decades now lay in ruins, scattered in the digital echoes of deleted emails, in the faded ink of long-forgotten documents, and in the whispered confessions of those who had once operated behind closed doors. The legacy of a career built on both remarkable achievements and equally remarkable transgressions was now under the harsh light of scrutiny. And in that scrutiny, every lie, every cover-up, every carefully hidden truth was revealed for what it was, a testament to the dangerous allure of power untempered by accountability. As the final moments of the hearing unfolded, a silence fell over the chamber, a silence that was heavy not with respect, but with the raw, unfiltered truth of what had transpired. The people in the room, each one a silent witness to the collapse of a carefully constructed narrative, knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The legacy of that day would ripple outwards, challenging the very foundations of a political system that had long operated without consequence. And in that ripple, there was a promise that the pursuit of truth, no matter how long it took, would ultimately prevail over the forces of deception and manipulation. The chamber emptied slowly, the echoes of Bondi's final words lingering in the air like a solemn oath. Outside, the night had deepened, the city lights twinkling in the distance as if in silent testimony to the magnitude of the events that had just unfolded. And in that quiet darkness, a new chapter began, a chapter in which accountability was no longer an abstract concept, but a tangible force capable of challenging even the most entrenched power. For Hillary Clinton, the journey that had defined her life, her career, and her legacy was now at a crossroads. The shield of her name, once a guarantee of untouchable power, had been irrevocably tarnished by the revelations of that night. No longer could she hide behind the veneer of political legacy or the carefully curated narrative of her supporters. The weight of evidence, of every document and every recorded conversation, was a burden that could no longer be ignored. And as she sat there in the dim light of the chamber, facing the judgment of both the evidence and the assembled witnesses, she understood that this was not just the end of an era, it was the beginning of a reckoning that would forever alter the course of history. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of that fateful hearing spread like wildfire across the nation. Journalists, pundits, and citizens alike grappled with the magnitude of the revelations. Debates raged in living rooms, boardrooms, and on television screens as the full implications of the hearing were slowly digested by a public that had long grown cynical of political obfuscation. And in the midst of this maelstrom, one undeniable truth emerged, that the pursuit of truth and accountability was a relentless force that, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually rise to the surface. The narrative had been carefully constructed to dismantle decades of secrecy, to expose a system that had placed loyalty above justice, and to hold a once untouchable figure accountable for actions that transcended mere politics. And as the story continued to unfold in the collective consciousness of a nation yearning for honesty, it became clear that this was not merely a political reckoning, it was a profound, transformative moment in the ongoing struggle for transparency and integrity. In the end, the hearing was not just an indictment of one woman or one party. It was a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of a system that could adapt and reform, and the enduring spirit of those who believed that accountability was not a privilege, but a right. The final chapter had been written in a room filled with silent witnesses, in a moment when the weight of history was laid bare, and in a revelation that would echo through the corridors of power for generations to come. And as the last of the documents were archived and the screens were turned off, the legacy of that night remained, a legacy of courage, of reckoning, and of the unyielding determination to shine a light on the darkness that had long plagued a nation. The story had reached its conclusion, but its impact was only beginning. For in that chamber, under the unforgiving glare of truth, a promise was made, a promise that no one, no matter how powerful, would ever be allowed to rewrite history without facing the consequences. The final silence was not one of resignation, but of resolute determination, a commitment to a future where truth and accountability would reign supreme. The story of that night, of that hearing, and of the legacy that was forever altered would live on in the hearts and minds of all who had witnessed it. It was a reminder that even the mightiest of empires, built on secrecy and selective truth, could crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence. And as the nation looked toward a future defined by transparency and justice, the lessons of that day would serve as a beacon, a guiding light in the perpetual quest for a government that served its people above all else. In that moment of reckoning, when the veil of protected power was finally torn away, the American people were given a choice: to continue living under the illusion of untouchable authority or to embrace the painful, yet liberating truth that change was not only possible, but inevitable. The echoes of that night would resonate far beyond the confines of the chamber, inspiring a generation to demand accountability, to question the established order, and to forge a path toward a future where every act of governance was subject to the unyielding scrutiny of an informed and vigilant public. And so, as the night gave way to the dawn of a new era, the story that had been written in that hallowed chamber became more than a narrative of betrayal and deception. It became the clarion call of a nation awakening to the promise of truth, a promise that no matter how deeply hidden, the light of accountability would always find a way to shine through. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a chapter defined not by the legacy of a single individual, but by the unwavering resolve of a people who believed that, ultimately, justice would prevail.